Hi, it's me, Kaity.
And me, Adriane.
And you're listening to KindlED,
a podcast where we dig into the science behind building relationships and environments that help kids unlock their full potential and become empowered learners.
Together, we'll discover evidence-based tools and methods that will empower you to kindle the curiosity, motivation, and well-being of the young people in your life. Welcome to today's episode of KindlED. We're super excited to do a topic deep dive with everyone. And today we're going to be talking about punishments and rewards. But before we get to that, Adriane, hi, hello, and how are you?
Good. How are you today?
Doing great. So excited to be here.
I'm very excited to be here too. And you know how we've been talking about all these things, play and attachment and all the different topics. Mm-hmm. Well, it's been totally front of mind, and I've been hyper-focused on the way I'm behaving and the way I view my kids and how it's my culture and our society is impacting that. Mm-hmm. So yesterday we had an Easter egg hunt at my 6-year-old's Montessori school. All the kids are lined up on the side of the sidewalk. There wasn't a whole lot of organization. They're just ready to go get these eggs. And a lot of times, you know, in these Easter egg hunts, they have just the eggs all out on the lawn. Well, this PTO did an amazing job. They literally hid, I don't know how many hundreds of eggs, but they were hidden in bushes and trees and ledges. And so all the kids are ready. And so they let the littlest ones go first. There were only a few, but my son's age group didn't realize they were supposed to wait. So they ran out and they're so excited. So they made the elementary kids stay back. And so those poor elementary kids are just standing there waiting. So by the time they were released to go, there weren't very many eggs left. So then, you know, there's lots of tears and kids that are upset, but it was a beautiful day. And I feel like that kind of helped with the sunshine and the palm trees. But they're running around this courtyard. And there was a few kids that literally had 0 eggs in their bag. Well, my son was one of the kids that ran out before he was supposed to. So he had this big old sack of eggs. So I looked at him and I said, hey, do you see that there's kids that don't have eggs? I so badly want to be like, oh, you take your eggs and you go give them to those kids. Yes. But with all these things that we've been talking about, I'm like, okay, I want him to be intrinsically motivated to give his eggs away, but I'm going to help a little bit. You know, I'm going to kind of guide him.
He needs a good idea from mom.
Yeah. So he did not want to give his eggs away. He was like looking at his eggs, looking at the kids, and you could tell he was having this internal struggle. So I told him, I said, it's totally up to you. I said, but can you think about if you had an empty bag with no eggs in it and how that would make you feel? And he's like, I'd be sad. I said, you would be sad. I said, but how would you feel if someone gave you an egg? I'd probably be happy. You know, he has like this grumpy face. I said, yeah. I said, but it's totally up to you, bud. If you don't want to give the eggs away, because I could tell it was really bothering him. But I so badly wanted to give him praise or give it, oh, well, if you give an egg away, I'll give you this reward. I'll give you this sticker. You know, I so badly wanted to do that because that is kind of what's ingrained in my mind. Or it was more about me, like, oh, well, I want the other parents to see that my kid is giving the egg away.
Yep, totally.
I was thinking about that. I was like, well, what is my goal here? My goal is for him to want to do these things and for him to notice it himself, not do it just because I'm telling him to. Right. So I had to kind of rein it all in, and we started walking out to the car. We were just talking about this weekend, how we're going on this other big Easter egg hunt that our city puts on. He looks at me and just turns around and walks back. And I was like, yes, so excited. But again, it was totally selfish, but you know, I'll work on that. Yeah, so he walks back, and not only did he just hand a few eggs to kids, he went and hid them so that they would have the opportunity to go find eggs. And this little girl, oh my goodness, the look on her face, she had an empty bag. and Dax was hiding them. And I saw her like run over and grab it, put it in his bag, and her face was just lit up.
Aww.
And I looked at him, I said, do you see her face? He's like, I do. He's like, and now I feel it in my heart too.
Oh, I'm going to cry.
And then he came home and was so excited to tell his brothers what he did.
That's amazing. If you had done that, you would have had an eggless kid in the car mad at you. Instead, you had an eggless kid in the car so happy because he had internalized that value, which we're going to talk more about today. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about our topic, rewards and punishments. Pretty broad. We're going to dig into some of the details here. So just to like kind of bring this home to like your interactions with kids right now, I want you to just kind of think back about the last time you gave someone an instruction. We're giving kids instructions all the time. If you're a classroom teacher, if you're a micro school guide, if you're a parent, coach, it's pretty much, I would say, I don't know, like 80% of what you say. It's like, go do this. And now this is the plan. And like just keeping kids, you got to like move people along. And so I'm wondering if you can remember the last time you gave an instruction. And if you just said, hang your coat up, or if you just said, share with your brother, or was there some sort of consequence or punishment or reward tied to that, either directly or, kind of subconsciously, like share with your brother, or there's like a, or if there's always like an or an and, like share with your brother, or I will take that away from you, or I'll help you share, or share with your brother and I'll share with you, or like I'll give you this other thing, right? There's either like there's a carrot or a stick. Carrot and a stick, that's kind of a euphemism for a punishment or reward. Do I have that backwards? Carrot, stick, reward, punishment. There you go.
I never understood what carrot and stick meant. So thank you for breaking it down for me.
That's what it means. It's kind of funny. So either, and you can think of a donkey, that's like how we move donkeys along. Either you have a carrot out in front of them, like they're chasing a carrot, or you're hitting them from behind to get them to go, a carrot or a stick. So that's kind of like our go-to strategies for getting anyone really to, even ourselves sometimes, to do something, right? And we don't want to go into this discussion painting punishments and rewards as always bad or always inappropriate. Like that's not true. That's not what the research shows. So our goal is just to increase our awareness and help us take a moment to consider how we're using punishments and rewards, and to be able to do that in perhaps a more respectful and effective way. Because when we get into this research, it's going to blow your mind, the actual results of punishments and rewards. So essentially what we're trying to dig into today is why we are constantly putting kids into this position. I always like see things in equations. Is that weird? I'm not even like very good at math, but for some reason I like to languageify in equations. So I think about, this is the equation for punishments and rewards. If you do X, you will get Y, or do X or else Y. Like I'm going to give you something if you do this, or I'm going to withhold something from you, or give you a negative punishment. So some examples of that are, let's all finish our work before the bell and then we can go out to recess. Even that simple phrase is like, we're saying we're doing this so that we can get that, right? And these things are just so normalized. It's hard to even see. And it almost makes you sound like a crazy person when you start talking about it and then like wondering, being curious if it's actually effective, because it's just so normal. It is the way the world works. But essentially what we're doing to kids when we create a world for them that runs on punishments and rewards, and I'm not trying to say that the normal world doesn't run on punishments and rewards. There are natural consequences. We go to work to make money. Like our economies work on this principle, but there are just some special considerations we want to dig into when we're talking about kids. So essentially what punishments and rewards do, and this is an Alfie Kohn quote. If you don't know who that is, he wrote a book called Punishments and Rewards. He's also written a book called Unconditional Parenting, and he talks a lot about this topic. So this is the way he kind of frames this, and it was really helpful to me when I first heard this. So I'm going to share. So essentially when we build a world that's full of punishments and rewards for kids, what we're doing is subconsciously getting that kid to ask, what does this adult want me to do? And what do I do if I get it? Or what happens to me if I don't get it? And when they're asking that question, the question that they're not asking is, what kind of person do I want to become? And how do I get there? Right? So it's not that we should never use punishments and rewards. It's that there's this opportunity cost of helping a child develop more intrinsic motivation, personally held values, and an ability to govern themselves. And so that's kind of what we're going to dig into today.
Yeah, and it's all about what that child is doing and not who they are, which if you look at what your actual goal is or your role is, like we talked about in episode 2, that's not what our goal is, right? Is just to get our kids to do X. We want them to be kind, self-regulated, compassionate beings that, want to get to, or whatever your role or goal is. We have to really step back and go, okay, by offering these punishments and rewards, am I actually going to achieve my goal? And some people would say, yes, well, it works. Well, what does it work to do? Get them just to behave and do exactly what you want. And is that the real goal? And for some people, that may be the real goal. But what the research shows us, and not just the research, but I have seen this just in my own house with other families that I have coached, and just seeing this shift of all the rewards and punishments and shifting to more of this intrinsic motivated way of parenting. And it's incredible how much more motivated our kids are just to be good people whenever we take away these rewards and punishments.
Yeah, I totally agree. So why do you think that we rely so heavily on punishments and rewards?
Honestly, I think so much of it is societal norms in our world and in our society, in our American society, but it really isn't in all parts of the world. If you dive into more indigenous communities, you don't see these punishments or rewards. Or even I was doing Little Gym with my little guy when he was like 2, and that's right around when I started reading Alfie Kohn's work and understanding these punishments and rewards and sticker charts and certificates and all the things. And I was, again, hyper-focused on it and could not believe how many times good job was said or stickers just to get these kids to tumble and roll around, which they naturally would do anyways. Yeah. And there was a woman there, I forget what country she was from, but she had told me, she's like, yeah, we don't say good job to our kids. We don't give them stickers if they do something. She said, this is kind of odd. And I think it can tie back to the Industrial Revolution and why school was invented to create factory workers, right? We need to line all these people up in the factories and they need to do what we tell them to.
Absolutely. So I was actually just writing a blog about this. I've been reading Todd Rose's The End of Average. Have you heard of this book?
I have not read that one. I'll definitely have to put that on my list.
Yeah, it's good. He's talking a lot about how the world suddenly discovered like the average and started comparing everything against the average. And that caused a lot of like efficiency and like in this industrial revolution, moving into like the factory and like trying to get factories more and more efficient. And so they were trying to like normalize everything. And he talks about the invention of the public school system. And it was really interesting because there were kind of 2 camps he talks about when they were discussing the purpose of the system. And so I want to actually read what he says. This is from The End of Average. It's on page 50, if you have the same version that I have. There was one group of educators that argued that the proper goal of education was to provide students with the freedom to discover their own talents and interests by offering an environment that would allow them to learn and develop at their own pace. Some even suggested that there should be no required courses and that schools should offer more courses than any student could possibly take. So it's focused on the individual and like they're discovering their passions and interests and their talents. And then Camp 2 talks about how they wanted the new mission of education to be to prepare mass numbers of students to work in the new economy. And they followed the maxim that a system of average workers was more efficient than a system of geniuses. And they argued that schools could provide a standard education for an average student instead of trying to foster greatness. And that just totally blew my mind. Wow. That like from the get-go, the goal was not to develop people. It really was to sort them and prepare them for the economy. And that's kind of where we're at now. And luckily, like millions of families are waking up to this and noticing like, oh, this isn't really working for my kids. Those aren't the results that they want. It does work, right? To get, like you mentioned before, like it depends on what you mean by the word work. Like it definitely has that, like our system definitely has those results. And so the creators of the system would have said like, so wild success, it totally worked because that was our intent. If you're intending to develop individuals and consider them valuable and their passions and interests like part of what we want to develop, then you would really just do a different thing.
Right. And it works, but at what expense? And especially if the goal is to just create these cogs in the machine, then yeah, go ahead and keep using the punishments, rewards, and get those results that you want. However, what we're realizing is that comes at an expense of psychological and emotional trauma, as we've mentioned before. And so we really want to look at the goal should be development. We want to develop that brain. Dr. Dan Siegel talks a lot about how parents and educators and adults in children's lives, how we actually play a huge role in shaping physically the shape of the physical brain. Mm-hmm. We play a huge role in that. And this is all part of it. Is what is our goal? Is our goal for development and for them to develop in these healthy ways? Or is our goal to just get them to do what we want? And it's kind of like back in the Easter egg hunt. Is so a part of me just wanted him to do it so that I could look good, mm-hmm. and so that I felt like I was being a good parent. Mm-hmm. I stepped back. It was very hard, but I stepped back and paused, asked myself, what is my real goal here? Mm-hmm. What do I want him to learn in this? Mm-hmm. And how can I get him to learn that? And hey, even if he walked away without, it was pretty awesome that he ended up, giving the eggs away. Mm-hmm. But even if he didn't do that, I gave him time to reflect, and I gave him time to be able to make that choice on his own, which we've talked a lot about with autonomy.
And he can learn from both decisions, right? Like, it's uncomfortable for you as a mom to see that little girl because you have this deep empathetic heart that you've developed, and he is still developing even his ability to think like, what is it like to be someone else, right? In his prefrontal cortex, it's very difficult for him to kind of project himself at his stage of development. And so even if he had had not shared the eggs, gotten in the car with his thing full of eggs, eventually he would have felt some level of remorse, maybe not. Kids at different developmental levels, like remorse, we always force kids to say sorry before they're really feeling sorry. And it's not inappropriate, I think, for us to teach our kids good manners and to say sorry if they need to say sorry, that's fine. But to understand that that's not a true apology. A true apology is when you actually feel remorse for something, and then the socially appropriate behavior is to express that remorse by apologizing. That's very different than you did something wrong, say you're sorry. And there's been no internal development or step towards self-governance if we do it that other way.
Right. And I think, reflecting back to why punishments and rewards became so popular is with B.F. Skinner and behaviorism, and really trying, again, what we keep talking about is controlling our kids' behaviors and controlling what they do, which then really influences on who they become versus just allowing them to become who they are. Mm-hmm. Okay, so can we dig into the research? I really want to know what the research says about this.
Yes, totally. So I have a few studies, and I just want to express that it's just a few studies that I'm sharing. There are hundreds of studies that support these general outcomes. These are kind of just like the most famous ones you'll hear about. So there's kind of two main findings in the research. Punishments and rewards decrease performance and accuracy, and then they also decrease interest, creativity, and motivation. So we're going to go into really quickly just the performance and accuracy research, and then we'll jump into the other one. So I'll just kind of summarize one of these studies I thought was really interesting. So they took this is with college students, and they took them into a room like one at a time and gave them a box of matches and some thumbtacks and a candle. And they timed them to see how long they could figure out a way to mount the candle to the wall. And they were supposed to figure out that you could take the matches out and use the thumbtacks to thumbtack the box to the wall and then put the candle on the wall. That's like the solution. So they timed them. And half of the people, they just let them do the activity and timed them. And then the other half of people, they told, like, we will pay you if you get it right. And so there was this reward that the the participants felt like they were working for, it actually took them 50% longer to figure out
wow.
the solution. Isn't that crazy? There's another study where, I mean, this one like seems a little silly, but they took a bunch of 9-year-old boys and they showed them 2 smiley faces that had like slight differences in them. And they told one group of boys, we'll pay you for every right answer. And another group of boys, they just felt like they were playing a game. And every single time, anyone that was being rewarded, their accuracy and performance decreased. Like this is like a very well substantiated finding in the literature. And it's just like so shocking because surely you'd think if you're motivated, you'll do better. But what actually happens is that motivation, it does make you engage more, but it actually puts you under this psychological stress that disconnects your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain you actually solve problems with. So introducing that threat of missing out on something or receiving some sort of punishment in a different setting, like those things trigger the brain in specific ways that make it actually more difficult to perform well.
Or it also just becomes about the reward. And if the reward isn't something that they really want, so maybe they didn't want money or they didn't want a sticker chart. So then that decreases the motivation to even try or put effort into it. Because I saw a study very similar to what you're talking about. Alfie Kohn was on Oprah. I think it was back in the 90s. Yeah. I remember the outfits were amazing and that they were both wearing. And it was very similar. It was like these kids, they were in a mall and these kids came in and half of the kids were going to get paid, or I forget what kind of the reward. Maybe it was like a toy or something to solve these puzzles. And then other kids weren't going to get a reward at all. And it was amazing how much less time it took for the kids that were not getting their reward, or some of the kids that were going to get the reward just quit. Like they didn't even like continue to do the puzzles.
If we take that and put it into like an educational setting, when we say things to kids like, hurry, or you're not going to get your sticker, it's like, that's not helping them hurry. That's not helping them get through to actually learn the math or whatever. It's not helping them learn.
It's helping the stress increase in their brainstem, which then makes it hard for them to finish the task.
Okay, this is something I'm just putting together. So there's 2 participants in this experience. There's the teacher, the adult, and the child. And both of them have nervous systems and both experience stress. And so as adults, we experience stress when there's a lot of chaos or we're not in control. And so setting up that situation with a kid where there's an if-then actually helps decrease the stress to the adult because you feel like, hey, I am in control. So that's helpful to you, but it's actually elevating the stress for the child. So I love your example with the Easter eggs because it was really hard for you. It was more stressful for you to withhold, right? And so it's just interesting whose nervous system gets the priority in these situations.
Right. But if we're looking at our role and our job is to help develop and shape our child's brain, then I think with practice, it won't be as hard and we can get ourselves out of that logical brain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So moving on to research about interest, creativity, motivation. They've done some really interesting studies with little kids. So they'll take kids in like a developmental preschool or something like that, or kindergarten, first grade, and they'll just give them a bunch of activities, one of which is to draw. And then they'll take some kids and they'll reward them for drawing. It's like, oh, if you draw, then you'll get a certificate or you'll get a candy or something like that. And then they watch how many times those kids that know that they're going to get rewarded for picking a specific activity actually engage in that activity. And the motivation to like participate in that, their interest in that activity goes up initially and then drops significantly below the level that it was before they were ever rewarded. They've also found that the work that the kids do, the art that they do when they're being rewarded, if they like evaluated it as much as you can evaluate like a kindergartner or first grade's artwork, they could tell that it was like a lot less creative. They were just like phoning it in on their drawings. They weren't taking their time. They weren't actually expressing themselves. It was just kind of like blah, blah work. So it decreased interest and their motivation to participate and also the quality of their work. So another really interesting study, this is done by Mark Lepper at Stanford. He brought a bunch of kids in to do art projects, and there were lots of different types of things the kids could use. Colored pencils, markers, paint, whatever. But he said, before you use any of these other things, you have to use the colored pencils or the markers or whatever. He said there was just kind of like a one thing that you had to do before you had access to the other things. And they noticed that over time, whatever that thing was that you had to do, the kids' interest in using that decreased over time. So they just like eventually didn't want to use it. They would use it really quick and then they would never use it again. They learned to see it as this undesirable thing because you were forced to do it. And this is just interesting because you can sub anything into that framework, right? Like finish your math, then you can go play. Share those stickers and I'll give you some fruit snacks. If you get straight A's, I'll give you $50. Like all of those if-thens, you're painting whatever you have to do as the super undesirable thing. And the research shows time and time again that it's going to decrease your child's ability to do that well and also their interest and motivation to do that. And my favorite example of this is actually, this is a program that started in the 90s by Pizza Hut. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called the Book It program.
I loved the Book It program, but it did not, thinking back, what's so interesting is my motivation to read definitely decreased. And I would become so stressed out that I wasn't going to get all the little, because wasn't it like a little note card type of thing, and you put the stickers on it and you had to go to Pizza Hut and turn it in.
Yep.
Yes.
So just so for people that haven't heard of the study, or it wasn't a study, it was just a thing that Pizza Hut did to get kids to read. People have now in hindsight studied it. But essentially for all of the books, if you read books, you'd come in and they'd give you free pizza. What kid doesn't love free pizza? So they'd read and read and read to get the free pizza. And what this taught was that you should only read if someone's giving you something. Like reading is inherently yucky and you need to be paid or rewarded to do it. And once the pizza was gone, what do you think happened to the reading?
It decreased. This reminds me of when my son was in third grade. Loved his teacher. She was incredible. She was just doing what she was told. She's told to use all these punishments and rewards, and maybe not even punishments. Some classrooms do PBIS and all these positive rewards, but they're still focusing on getting a child to do exactly what you want. And so I remember she had a lot of boys in her class, hyperactive boys. I want to say out of her 32 students, which we won't even get into how that is a lot of students in a third grade class, she had about 20 to 23 boys. And I think 6 or 7 of them had actual diagnosed ADHD. So her class was loud and crazy, and the type of school it was, it's not supposed to be loud and crazy. These kids are supposed to sit with their feet flat on their floor, their hands folded on their desk, and supposed to be learning that way. But it's really hard for a kid with ADHD to learn and not be able to move. So she was desperate and wanted anything to try to help get these kids to do all the curriculum that she was supposed to be teaching them. So she came up with this system of she would have a dry erase marker and put it on their desk. And if you got an X, then you don't get to go to lunch with her on Friday. So, or there might have been a certain amount of X's. She was trying to do anything to be able to get these kids to sit still and get their work done. And by day one, my son, one of the ADHDers, would get an X. So what would happen? His behavior would get so much worse because he's like, I can't go to lunch with her anyways. I really wanted to, but I already got an X. It's Monday. So you know what? I'm not going to behave in the way she wants me to. None of this was cognizant. This was all subconscious, right? And so I sat down with her and I shared some of this research with her, and she was flabbergasted. She could not believe that all these things that she's been told on how to motivate kids and how to get kids to behave in her class was actually demotivating them. And it was incredible to watch her take all this information and research and shift the way that she treated these kids. And they became so much more intrinsically motivated. Yes, their behavior was still big and loud and because of the way they were wired, but her mindset changed, and it was incredible how much more learning happened in her classroom.
That is an incredible story. And I just want to say, like, if you are a teacher in a classroom and you're dealing with a lot of kids, like having one teacher and a lot of kids, it almost makes these things required to learn anything, almost. And so I mean, I'm just a huge advocate of smaller class sizes, obviously. And just those, Adriane, in all of your words, what I pulled out is just that like there's this expectation that kids should sit and listen and should, and we expect. And a lot of those things are not developmentally appropriate, as we know from our other conversations. So when you are in that situation, Adriane, what are some things you can do? Like, what did she change? I'm really curious.
So she actually really leaned into her connection with the kids, and then she would recognize their strengths. So instead of seeing these behaviors as something she needed to fix or a deficit. So for example, for my son, she recognized that he's a natural born leader and that he did much better if he was able to lead other kids. So she would put him in charge of math lessons. And it was incredible because he was focused on doing something that he was interested in, and also that he was getting that feedback from the other kids. Instead of being loud and crazy and just acting in ways that made it really hard for her to teach, she utilized his skills and his strengths to be able to help her teach, which was really amazing. And then I saw her utilizing small groups a lot more, and then just giving the kids more autonomy.
That is such an amazing example. Like, all of this to say that being managed by punishments and rewards isn't really behaving yourself. In fact, the punishments and rewards are actually behaving you, and it's robbing kids of the opportunity to develop true self-governance. What we really need to shift to, if we want kids to be able to govern themselves, meaning that they're able to inhibit their own behaviors, they're able to internalize their own values and act out of those values. If we really want those things, we have to give them opportunities to discover those values and to strengthen that muscle inside them. It's actually just their prefrontal cortex being wired up and active that allows them to do that.
This reminds me of in the book Drive by Dan Pink. It's all about human motivation. I'm probably not going to get it completely accurate because it's been a couple years since I read that book, but there was a company that they did a study on if they would upfront tell them, okay, if you do this project, then you're going to get this bonus. And then they had a group of people that did the job. It was like creating posters or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they, are you familiar with this?
Yeah, it's stuffing envelopes.
Stuffing envelopes. There you go. and so then they would get a reward or bonus after, not knowing beforehand, and they would still get rewarded after. And they showed that the motivation and how quickly they did it was way better if they gave the bonus after than if they told them they were going to get a bonus if they did the work. Is that correct?
Yeah. The same thing that happens in the art studies we talked about. There's actually a third group we didn't talk about where they were rewarded after. They didn't know during the time they were going to be rewarded. It was a surprise, and it wasn't like consistent every time. And that did not have the same effect on the motivation or anything like that. So that's another great point.
So we talked a lot about intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation. And a lot of this is tied to conditions too, that we don't even realize that we're putting on kids. If you do this, then you'll get this, which is communicating to them, my parent only likes me if I do this thing for them. And so we place all these conditions, even though we'll tell ourselves that we unconditionally love our kids. Again, this is all from societal norms. This is all from just our culture and how it's evolved to try to get people to behave in ways and do things that the adult wants. So Kaity, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about the different types of motivation.
Sure. Yeah. So we've talked about intrinsic and extrinsic, and that's very like binary, but actually the research shows that it's a little more nuanced than that. It's more of a spectrum, and there's different types of extrinsic motivation. So we want to go through these because remember, our goal today is to not just say that punishments and rewards are bad. They're not. We want to understand them, right? We want to understand the results of what we're doing as adults. So imagine a line where on one extreme of the line, one side of the line, we have no motivation or amotivation, which means not. I just call this the nope. Like you're not motivated to do it. It's not getting done. You don't care. There's no reward or sticker or anything that can get you to do the thing. You just don't care. You have no motivation. So that's actually a state of motivation, just not being motivated. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have intrinsic motivation. And we want to define intrinsic motivation as things that you do because they're inherently enjoyable. Like you can eat chocolate if you like chocolate, and that's enjoyable. You're intrinsically motivated to do that, right? And you might be intrinsically motivated to watch movies or play video games, or you might be intrinsically motivated to like study astronomy or figure out how black holes work or what the vitamins that you're eating are doing in your body. Like we have lots of like learning can be an intrinsically motivating experience, but we have so many extrinsic motivator like kind of blockers that it's hard for us to imagine that. Then in the middle of these two extremes, you have extrinsic motivation. And all of this comes from Richard Ryan and Edward Deci self-determination theory. We talk about it all the time. I hope you guys can like quote it in your sleep by now. So in between these two extremes, so technically 4. Don't tell Dr. Deci that I've adapted this. We're just going to focus on 3. So the first type of extrinsic motivation, I call this like the candy or the sticker or whatever. It's like, you do this, I'll give you that. It's actually, there's some sort of externally provided, like hierarchical, like you don't have this and I'll give it to you if you do the behavior. So that's kind of like the bottom tier of extrinsic motivation. There's 2 other tiers. The middle tier is where it's more of like a judgment thing where like you want people to think that you're nice, or you want your teacher to think you're the good kid, right? So there's this value, but it's not a value that you hold. It's a value that someone else holds.
That you are adapting to.
Yeah, right. So we call this like the judgment level. And you can kind of hear, I'm like reviewing some of the last few sentences I've said to my kids. I'm like, I do this all the time. Or I'm like, oh, we want to be nice. Like we want to be like, oh, like we don't do that in our family. Like we are like nice people or something like that. We're like, oh, in order to be included in my family now, I have to demonstrate this value. Like it's conditional, right? So it's still like I'm offering something, you're doing something to get something.
And also not even just what we're saying to our kids, but nonverbal as well, as the mom side eye or that look that we can give our kids that kind of will extrinsically motivate our kids to do something because they want to be a good kid.
Yeah, totally. And that, I don't want to like make that sound like it's terrible. Like we use those things all the time. I just want to be aware that we're doing them and that we're not doing them in super belittling, harmful ways, right? Just be aware that, yeah,
correct.
We're doing that right now. Like we are communicating that this is a value that our society or family holds and that things will go better for you if you act in this way. Like we do want to provide that modeling and that scaffolding. That's totally fine. There are ways to do that respectfully, and then there are less respectful ways to do that. So then the third part of extrinsic motivation is where you've taken this value or this goal and you've internalized it. So examples would be like, I want to go hide the eggs because I want to be generous and I want to serve others. And, or I want to be a doctor because I want to help people, right? So that's like a goal, and it's my goal and it's my desire, but it's still not, I'm not going to go be a doctor because it's enjoyable or it's inherently just interesting, right? There's some sort of other driver there. And so it's still extrinsic motivation, but it's like the highest tier of extrinsic motivation. And all of these, the individual is experiencing a different level of autonomy. So with the candy, it's a very low level of autonomy. So that's where we get a lot of counter will and like fighting, like, I don't care about your reward. Like I'm going to do whatever I want. There's a lot of pushback there because you're not experiencing a lot of internal autonomy. So your natural response to that is to push back. And then with the middle one, the judgment, where I have this external value and you haven't internalized it yet, it's like, that's not there's more autonomy there than the candy situation, but it's still not me wanting something, right? So that's this middle ground. And then in the third one, we call it the purpose. Like I feel like I'm going to get myself to do these things because I want something, like I have this value or I have this goal. So it's a me thing. So those are the 3 types of extrinsic motivators that sit between no motivation and intrinsic motivation.
So when you were talking about the judgment piece of extrinsic motivation, for me, I was thinking about praise and how we, especially as a society, and I mentioned this earlier, how we say, good job, to a little developing brain that really doesn't mean a whole lot. And so in unconditional parenting, Alfie Kohn, he uses an example of saying good job to a child who is swinging on a swing set. And he says, it's gravity, for goodness sake. Why in the world are we telling them good job? And it really helped me step back and think, wow, we tell our kids good job when they eat all of their dinner. That's something that they need to do in order to survive. Or good job, you drank your water after you just ran. That's something that their body needs anyways. It really helped me pause and think about why I was saying good job and what the point was and if it really was beneficial or not. And we kind of just stopped. I don't even really say good job. Instead, I've replaced it with you did it, or something that helps them see it from, the inside. One of my kids was doing ISR lessons, swim lessons. I had just written a blog post about this. The instructor had read it and realized that she had said good job a lot. She works a lot with toddlers and babies. And it was amazing to watch how she shifted and would say, you did it, or you went under the water, and just really applying her praise to what they were doing to help motivate them to keep doing that. And we saw a shift in the kids of just her changing that little thing from good job to the process and praising the process.
Sometimes what kids, when they want you to look at what they're doing, they don't need a good job. They want you to see them. So sometimes I just say, I see you. I see you're doing that. I noticed that. And that's like enough for them to be like, yeah, I'm doing that. And like, it turns them inward instead of like continually looking to the outside world for evaluation. It puts it more internal. And I think that's really healthy.
And this is also connected to mindset. And Carol Dweck has done a ton of research on growth mindset and fixed mindset. And what she has found is if children don't hold up to the standard of what they've been called smart, intelligent, you are good, then they can't see it objectively as to what they can improve upon. And instead, they think the opposite is true. So if, I tell a child, trying to motivate them, and this is kind of a form of reward, right, is praise, is you are smart. But if they don't think they are smart, or it's not adding up and they can't see it objectively, they actually start thinking, well, I'm dumb, even though this adult is telling them that they're smart.
Or when they struggle and they don't get you're smart, then they conclude I'm dumb, and failure or struggle is like a deep cut to them. It's not just part of learning. It's like, oh no, like I've lost this label that had held me in such high esteem in my culture, and now it's gone. So like now learning is a very dangerous thing for me to do.
And that develops a very core limiting belief from a very young age that can last all the way into their adulthood and really affect their relationships, how they're able to perform, how they're able to behave, how they're able to connect to self-esteem. There's so many things that we could go into on another episode. Also, Carol Dweck talks about how person praise typically leaves a person to not try as hard. He or she tends to stay away from challenges to maintain that label. So they won't even try because they want to make sure, okay, they're telling me I'm smart, so I'm just going to do what I can to make sure I fit that label. I'm not going to put any extra effort into it, kind of like what we were talking about with the studies earlier on if there was a reward on the table. And then also she found that it is a short-term feel-good tactic when they are succeeding, but it affects their resilience in a negative way when they face setbacks later in life. So in studies of person praise at home, she found that with praise specific to morals, kids do and can have a growth mindset that we want to encourage. So we want to connect. So we're not saying that all praise and rewards and punishments and consequences and all the things are bad. We're just saying to be aware of what the goal is and what you're trying to accomplish, especially whenever we look at brain development and then shaping the kids' brains. And we want to encourage them to behave in ways that they're intrinsically motivated to do so.
So there's another really wonderful approach to, I guess we can call it behavior modification, where you are kind of re-establishing the labels that a kid is living into. So if a kid has had behavior issues or if they've struggled in school, they're going to have all sorts of labels like, I am a troublemaker, or I can't figure things out, like I'm just a dumb kid, right? So we need to combat those labels, right? And a way that we do this is a technique that was originated by Howard Glasser in the Nurtured Heart approach. It's called Energizing Greatness. And again, another equation for you. it's a simple language equation of, I see you doing this, and that means something about you. So for example, if you have a kid who is having a really hard time just being kind to people, and you see them do something kind, you want to call that out, and you do want to label that. And it would sound something like, hey, I saw you help your sister get that down from the shelf. That shows me that you're caring. And then you just walk away. It's not a big discussion. So you're just kind of reorienting the way that that child sees themselves. And so we can use this judgment or this like labeling in a good way. And I think that that's something that is overlooked a lot. Like we don't want to just call kids smart, which is true. The message is not just stop doing that. It's do it in a way that is more powerful. That's a powerful tool you have as an adult, and we're not really taking full advantage of it because we don't understand it. So instead of saying you're smart, give them a different thing about them that's more specific. Yeah, you stayed really focused. You asked others for help in that situation when you got stuck. Like tell them what they did that worked. And then that becomes a part of not only like building their internal toolkit of like, oh, like when I struggle, I'm the kind of person who just finds a more knowledgeable other and gets this done. Or I'm a person who, even when I'm mad, like I still do the kind thing. And that's you're scaffolding the movement of the external judgment into helping kids internalize those values. But we have to do it intentionally and in a healthy, respectful way.
And a way I do this a lot is by asking questions. So instead of, oh, wow, the artwork is beautiful, or you did a good job. So can you tell me about that? Can you tell me how you feel about that? So then we're helping the child apply it inward, which then can lead to that intrinsic motivation because they're not just doing it for what mom or dad or teacher is going to say about it and that judgment, like what we're talking about, but then they go inside, oh, wow, I really enjoy this, or I like the way that I, drew this dog or whatever it may be. And I think this kind of ties into a conversation we should have about how extrinsic motivators aren't necessarily just bad or we shouldn't do them because we can use them in less harmful ways, right?
Absolutely.
For example, if you need short-term compliance, because sometimes, even though that might not be your overall role or goal, sometimes our kids need to comply.
Or if you're the dentist or something like that, like you just have to sit in the chair, you're going to get a sticker or whatever. Like it's fine. It's temporary. It's not about a big value, right?
Right. It's not tied to character or who they are as a person, but it's something that we have to do is go get our teeth cleaned.
And you're acknowledging that it's not enjoyable. It's like talking about the Book It program, like reading is enjoyable, learning is enjoyable. Like there is potential for the task to be naturally motivating and enjoyable. We want to limit those extrinsic motivators. Even if those things are in the child's best interest, we want to help the child experience those things in a highly autonomous, enjoyable way so that they will just do them naturally and for the love of doing the thing instead of needing the reward, right? We can acknowledge that there's nothing enjoyable about having to sit in the dental chair and like get your teeth worked on, right? So if we acknowledge that, and that's another thing that that Drive points out is that when something is not enjoyable, acknowledge it. And that helps everyone's motivation be like, yep, we got to do this. We can help our kids experience those things in a way that is more autonomous and helps them feel their personal purpose in it. And all of that is tied to mental well-being and motivation, all of these great things that we want for our kids.
Right. And we want to normalize the human experience because life is not just rainbows and butterflies, and we're shielding and protecting our kids from only doing what they want and only doing things that they're intrinsically motivated. That's part of life, right? So there's like this fine balance. But as we've said multiple times, is we just need to have this awareness of how we're approaching these things. Is it helpful? Or is it honestly what Alfie Kohn says is it's actually damaging to the brain?
Yeah. Something that I love, a quote is that we need to prepare the child for the road and not the road for the child. And so there is a balance when we talk about all of these things, intrinsic motivation, being more gentle with kids, more respectful, to feel like that's protecting them or making them weak in some way. And I think there's just a balance, right? There's a way that we can help our kids find intrinsic motivation and be more respectful and gentle with them in a way that still carries high expectation and communicates our values and what's okay and what's not okay. And we can still provide opportunities for them. Okay, this is a very funny example. So when I was homeschooling, I took my kids to a birthday party. They were little too. And I had never had big kids. Like I think my oldest was 5 or something like that. And they were lining up for the piñata, and my kids did not know how to line up. Like they never stood in a line before. And that's like such a normal thing at school. It's like, well, you got to know how to get in line. And so I had all this like, come on guys, like get in line. Like this is called a line, and you stand here and you're behind this kid in the red shirt. And I was like telling them how a line worked. And I was like, man, maybe I shouldn't homeschool. These kids need to learn how to stand in line. So that was like my honest like conclusion in my mom brain that day. And then I thought, oh wait, yeah, they still need to learn how to stand in lines, but maybe I could just teach them that, right? Or like another example is our kids go to prenatal schools, and the culture in most prenatal schools is like kids can move, kids can talk, kids, like it's a lot more lively than your normal classroom. And so our kids go to sports practices now, and it's like, okay, there's a different world out there where adults motivate kids. I had to explain this. It's like, we're going to go to wrestling practice. And if you don't listen and like aren't like still, and like the coach might like make you do push-ups or like do something like that. It doesn't mean they don't like you. Like, it just means that they need you. Like that's just the normal way that adults get kids to comply in the outside world. And so it was funny to find myself explaining that. But then I thought, man, how grateful I am to just be able to tell them that instead of make it so their entire like 9 to 5 K to 12 education is them experiencing that. Something that Alfie talks about is bagooty. Have you heard him say this? Better get used to it. Yeah. So bagooty is an acronym for better get used to it. So it's like the mentality is life is full of things that you don't like and have to do. You better get used to it. Like it's just now you're 5, so your whole life is going to be like that. It's like we can still learn that, and they can still learn that about the world without making this like compliance driven rewards and punishments, like fear thing, their entire life. Right. Mm-hmm. And we can actually save them from a lot of stress and trauma if we do create these little bubbles where their life's not like that. And I think as soon as you're an adult, your life really isn't like that. There's not like some sort of like driver around here like forcing me to do like that's not how life works really. And so I think that's kind of that mentality has been exaggerated a little bit. You can still help kids understand social norms, compliance, following instructions, all of these things without like completely going the other direction. So a couple of other ideas about how to use extrinsic motivation in less harmful ways that I've used before. Just helping kids bribe themselves. Honestly, like I remember writing in grad school, I had to write like a 30-page paper or something. And I put white chocolate chips on my desk. I put 30 of them up there. And just every time I wrote a page, I got a chocolate chip, which would be really weird if my roommate or my teacher had set that up extrinsically for me as an adult in grad school. But because I made it, it was fine, right? So I'm still using that like candy level motivation, but I'm experiencing it with more autonomy because I helped build it. And kids don't get that because in the world, we control all of the resources. So we have to kind of come to their level and say like, hey, it seems like you're having a really hard time motivating yourself to do this. I know this is a thing that you really want. That's really important to you. How can I help you hold yourself accountable? This is a really good example. My son was really far behind in math. And it was before Christmas, and I was feeling all this mom pressure to get him on level, right? And so I said like, hey, I know you want to succeed at this. I'm like assuming all of the positive intent. I'm not saying, hey, you're lazy or you're bad at math or anything like that. Just assuming that you want to do this and that I'm confident in your ability to do this. There's not a doubt in my mind that you could do this if you wanted to. What can we do to help you like engage in this? Because I feel like you're just in this avoidance pattern because you're afraid to be wrong and things like that. And so he thought that maybe if he caught up, that he could go to the dollar store and spend one of his own dollars on something. And so my role in that was saying like, yeah, I'll drive you to the dollar store so you can spend your money on that. And he worked super hard for 2 weeks to get that. And actually by the end of that, he's like, I don't really need to do that. He didn't need his like reward that he'd given himself. And then another example of this is same kid, same topic, doesn't know his math facts yet. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. It's obviously unenjoyable. Like in my head, it like meets all the requirements for like, okay to bribe. And so I'm like, all right, I will give you $10 if you memorize these things. And like, as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, no. He just looked at me and he was like, I thought you said no bribes. And he like called me out on it. And he's like, no, like bribe not accepted. Like I'll figure it out. Like I'm going to do it. And so I was like, all right.
Oh my gosh. So when we do these bribes, we want to make sure that there's a short-term focus and make sure that it's communicated and, have these candid conversations, especially depending on how old the child is and how much they're able to understand. If you normalize this language and normalize like, hey, we don't need this reward, but if it feels good, and then that becomes their normal instead of, oh, I will only do this if you give me this.
Yeah. So a great classroom example of this is like, maybe we have an issue where like the class is just getting way too noisy and that's precluding us from learning or something like that. So we're going to do a short-term focus goal where we're going to do a bean jar or something like that. Like we're, like whatever, you're going to use one of those methods, but every time you would like administer that treatment, like put a bean in the jar, pom-pom or something, everyone says like what the real purpose, like it's important to us, our community, that we provide everyone the opportunity to learn or something like that. And so we know this is a 1 week focus thing. And then every time we do it, we revisit our real purpose. So then we can pull that scaffold away and we haven't lost our real purpose. And we didn't do it for so long that we like engendered a dependency on that.
Yeah, those reward jars is actually why I could no longer get my son to walk into his classroom, because for him, with pathological demand avoidance, even rewards and sticker charts is another demand. I was like, well, I have to do this. It causes this stress response of feeling like he has to fit in this box. And especially with the classroom rewards, it was really hard for him because he's like, wait, I was behaving well. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. Why did we get cotton balls taken out of the jar? Because I didn't even contribute to that behavior. Yep. It was really, really hard for him to understand. And it got to the point where literally we would sit in the parking lot for hours and he would not walk into the building because of these jars. And so for some kids, it just causes way too much stress in the brainstem.
Totally. All right. So that's our discussion on punishments and rewards. We hope you've enjoyed it. And now we're going to hear a question from one of our listeners.
What conscious strategies have you used to change your reactions to negative behavior and or big feelings in interactions with your children? This comes from Amanda.
That's such a good question. And I think that it is so important that we all do take intentional, conscious strategies. So for me personally, meditation's been a big one, just making sure that I have enough like downtime to regulate my nervous system. And journaling has been good. Writing out, like, I'm seeing this child this way. We've talked about feeling your feelings more, just like taking a minute. And I actually thank my nervous system for trying to help me be safe so that my brain, like, we close the loop of like, hey, I'm trying to tell you that there's a problem here. And I'm using my conscious brain to say like, hey, I see that you think there's a problem here. Thank you. I will handle it. So that's been helpful for me. And also just a lot of self-compassion. We can waste a lot of energy when we're judging ourselves for yelling or for just responding to negative behavior in ways that we wish we wouldn't. And instead of just taking all of that energy and focusing on how I was doing the best that I could at the time and how I can do better in the future and restoring that relationship instead of just beating myself up over it all the time.
And honestly, for me, it is the paradigm. I feel like I've taken off so much pressure in going from, oh, it's my job for my kid to behave in XYZ, to be this kind of kid, to not be so focused on the behavior. Because yes, if the behavior is triggering me, then I need to do all the things that you're talking about, the meditation and breathing and pausing, journaling, all those kinds of things. But honestly, it doesn't even trigger me as much because my paradigm has shifted as to what behavior is. 100%. I'll stop and think, okay, why is he behaving this way? Instead of trying to just stop the behavior and really understand that. And typically it's tied to hunger or being tired or not getting enough proprioceptive or vestibular input or whatever that might be. It's not even a trigger anymore because my mindset has shifted about what behavior is.
I love that. Thanks, Amanda. That was a really great question. So now I'm so excited. It's time to announce our very first inaugural member of the Spark Squad. So just as a reminder, the Spark Squad is a group of adults that are awesome at kindling curiosity, motivation, love of learning, self-worth in kids. So you can submit nominations for the Spark Squad by emailing podcast@prenda.com. Our first Spark Squad nomination goes to Jody Artis.
Jody has been a microschool guide in Pine Top, Arizona since August 2020. She transitioned from teaching in the special education department at the local school to become a K2 microschool guide. She has 3 children of her own, and her youngest was running around in diapers when she first opened her school. She has incredible figure it out skills. She always starts with heart, and she demonstrates learning over comfort so beautifully. She's experienced the highest and lowest points of running a microschool and is a true example of how to empower her students to dare greatly and how to build a foundation of trust.
Thank you so much, Jody, for everything you're doing to kindle curiosity, motivation, and a love of learning in the lives of your students. Keep an eye out for a spotlight on Jody in KindlED's newsletter this week and on our social media @PrendaLearn. So that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. In the next episode, we'll be talking more about motivation and the conditions needed to really help our kids find their drive. We'll be learning from Dr. Gina Riley, an educational psychologist and clinical professor and the program director of the Adolescent Special Education Program at CUNY Hunter College. It's going to be amazing, and you're not going to want to miss it.
Don't forget to subscribe to KindlED wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review, rate us, and share our episodes on social media and tag us @PrendaLearn. For more KindlED content, head on over to prenda.com/KindlED and subscribe to the KindlED newsletter.
Don't forget to send us your questions, concerns that you want Adriane and I to coach you through, and all of your Spark Squad nominations. You can email everything to podcast@prenda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep kindling.